So excited today. We're going to go into Desert Speaks Part 2. And in that, I'm going to share, one second, doggy. I'm going to go a little bit more into the desert, specifically because the show that I'm doing now, Inquiry, Freedom Through Inquiry, was inspired by my experience in the desert. So I want to share with each and every one of you a little bit more about my experience and a little bit more about inquiry and about a challenge, a free challenge that we're going to host to help each and every one of you have a mini desert experience. This is bugging me. I just got to get it centered, right on the third eye. Okay. So let's see. Anyone else here? Diane, good to see you. Yeah. Thanks for your patience, everyone, today. All right. So you guys heard a good amount of my desert story, I think, on our last week. And let's see here. Okay, so I'm gonna back up, tell a little bit of the story that I didn't tell, and I'm gonna share with you two what I called bosses that I faced in the desert. And I'll give you my actual example of this, and then I'm going to talk about the challenge. So, just to rewind, recap, a couple weeks ago now, I think a little over 2 weeks, I went to Death Valley and spent 3 days preparing for a 4-day water fast. That water fast would be a combination of sleep deprivation, obviously no food, only drinking water, non-doing, so very little to do. And when I say non-doing, we always do something. You could sit here and breathe and you're doing something. The truth is, and what I discovered in the desert, is that we're not doing anything. We are being done. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. So back to that recipe: isolation, sleep deprivation, fasting, non-doing, some sort of simulation of the potential of the fear of death. For us, it was just not having food. That's one way to do it. That can for some people, that can trigger it. But just being in an environment exposed to the elements where there's rattlesnakes and things that can actually kill you is a great way to get the mind, triggered. So that combination, those elements, those variables, plus inquiry, let my unconscious mind, anything from the past, any worries about the future, to come to the forefront of my mind. And because I had inquiry and a journal with a pen, I was able to sit down, write down any of those thoughts that caused me stress, any of those fears that caused me suffering in the moment, guilt, shame, anger, anxiety, whatever it is, and take it through a process until I felt completely free. And every time that I felt free, I didn't identify myself as Brandon Bozarth anymore, meaning I wasn't living in time. I wasn't thinking, oh, when is this going to end? Or I wasn't thinking that my future, I just really didn't have a belief in a future. So there was no seeking or looking for anything. And in the absence of looking and seeking, there's being, and being is absolutely free. Being is another word for our own awareness, self-awareness. So when we are not captured by the content of our mind and experience, then we can actually abide as awareness. That's another word for peace, because awareness is the absence of all concepts, of all emotional suffering, all resistance. And what's another word for that? Just peace, stillness. So in that stillness, there'd be times where I could feel the closeness of a bird that might have been a quarter mile away, but I could feel that it's the same distance from my awareness, than my own breath, than my own body, and that my body is awareness, not my physical body. And in those moments, I wouldn't identify as the one doing things in my body. Walking, talking, going to the bathroom, thinking. So I would just watch it being done, not as the doer, but as a type of witness. And it was extremely exciting in those moments because I actually didn't know what was going to happen. Even if I thought I knew, I wasn't holding on and believing the thought because I wasn't identified as the one thinking the thought. You know, if you were to ask me, were you thinking? Well, yes, there was times where I was thinking. Brandon was the thinker. And there was times where thoughts happened, but I wasn't thinking. I wasn't doing the thinking. I was abiding as awareness, which is still an absent of all thoughts and all feelings. So just in recap, my experience was one of resistance, identifying, seeking, searching, suffering, that then my bridge to my being was inquiry. And then I got to experience just pure being, which allowed me to genuinely say, it doesn't get any better than this. Being here in the desert, hungry, tired, alone, is the best that it gets. This is it. This is the peak. This is as free as I'll ever be, in this moment, which is every moment. So there's a little recap of my energetic experience. Now, I'm going to tell you about 2 bosses that I battled, and it did feel like a battle. And then I'm going to tell you about a challenge that I'm inviting all of you to. It's absolutely free, to give you a taste of my experience, to equip you with inquiry, to give you a couple of trainings and Q&As exclusive for this challenge. So you can then go have your own experience of just one day, not overnight, but from first light to sunset, which is about 16 hours, or maybe a little less depending. So about 16-ish hours of finding a space in nature, drawing a circle that you won't leave unless you need to go to the bathroom, and just being, preferably a place that is you're alone with a journal. And anything the mind throws at you, get up and go, leave, you're bored, whatever it might be, you can relentlessly take it to inquiry and continue to open deeper into your being, deeper into freedom. And then there'll be one more call after that, focus on integration. And maybe you need to have certain conversations, how to have those conversations. So I'll talk about that at the end. 2 bosses that I battled in the desert. Start with the one that's the most uncomfortable. And so, let's see, I was maybe 21 or 22 years old, and I was really drunk, and I was with this woman, about the same age. She was really drunk too, and we started hooking up. And we were at a post-event gathering, and all I can really remember was that I would initiate, and then she would stop, and then I'd feel confused. Do you want this? Do you not? And I remember at the time having this intense feeling that I need to complete this interaction. I need to have an orgasm, in other words. Because my belief at the time as that version of me was, it's too much to be rejected. It's too much to not be like one of the guys that is making tons of money and sleeping with all the women. And I had this really distorted image of what a valuable man was. And I really couldn't, at the time, sit with my own feelings of low self-esteem or rejection. And so I remember feeling this desperation, this needs to happen a certain way. And at the same time, genuinely feeling I don't want to force this person. But if they don't say no, if they don't stop me, then am I forcing, or is this are we just kind of intoxicated and going in and out, and it's kind of confusing, and that's okay. It's like this gray zone of, well, if I'm not perpetrating, then it's okay. And, she never said no. She never said stop. She never got up and left. And so it was just this back and forth of you know, hooking up and then not, and then hooking up and not. And um, that completed itself. And I remember feeling not great. I remember feeling like, what was that? You know? Um, trying to think of what's the most relevant parts of this to tell you guys. Yeah, there was a point. I remember this is what came up really loud in the desert. There was a point where she was touching me. I'll just leave it there. You guys understand what I'm saying. And she would stop and start and stop. And the last time I just held her hand, like I didn't want her to stop. And I never felt her pull away or anything. And I had an orgasm. And I remember after thinking to myself, man, it didn't feel good. Not too sure what to think about that. Very confusing. Going home the next day, and then her telling her boyfriend that I didn't know she had. Brandon forced himself on me. And me hearing that and going, wait a second, that wasn't my experience. I never felt like we were in a conflict. I felt like there was a lot of confusion and starting and stopping, and I would initiate and then back off, and like this whole thing. And it hit me in that moment. It was like, Brandon, if you are a rapist, those are the labels that we use. As if that defines the individual, right? You're evil. You're unlovable. You're bad. No one's going to ever want to be around you. And even though in that moment, when I went to my experience, I was like, well, I don't ever feel like this person actually ever told me to stop or pushed me away or anything like this. I just, and if anything, felt like a confused, desperate kid. And I remember reaching out to her and saying, hey, that wasn't totally my experience. What are you saying? And she said to me, I exaggerated and kind of made some things up because I felt really guilty about, that happening because of my boyfriend. I remember in that moment feeling like a sense of relief, but that moment was a part of myself coming up that I wasn't ready to look at, that I resisted so much, and that even though I had an affirmation from her, I still discovered a part of myself that I couldn't accept or love or understand, or even allow myself to see with my awareness or my heart. I remember years later it resurfaced, and it was like this guilt, like what happened? And it, so blurry, so much of it is blurry since then. So I'm thinking there, and my mind is just going crazy. Well, did this happen or that or this or that? And I remember I reached out to her and said, hey, I'm really sorry. I don't know, like, what your experience was, but if I was forceful in any way, it was not my intention. And I don't know if that's affected you, if you felt that it was a traumatic experience or not a traumatic experience. And once again, receiving an affirmation, oh, it's totally fine. I've forgiven. It actually wasn't a big deal to me. Like being told that and affirming that it was just, a drunken hookup, and it's what it is. So even having two affirmations from this woman, and feeling and I'm sure you guys have felt this, feeling totally like I have done the work on this enough. I've had some cries about it. I've seen these beliefs. I've reached out. It still came up in the desert. It's like, but you've never actually joined fully with that part of yourself and said, if this was true, if you forced yourself on this woman, then you're unlovable. And I never really let myself fully join with that part of me. I wanted to deny that that's a part of me. And one thing that I've learned through the desert, which is really profound, is nothing is apart from us. That actually my willingness to be honest is the doorway for me to discover all that I am, and I'm all of it. you know, the murderer, the rapist, even if I don't murder or force myself onto someone or whatever, even if that doesn't happen physically, even if it just happens mentally, even if I have the thoughts, I'm so upset at this person, I just want them to get out of my life, I want them to not exist. I've had those thoughts. We've all had those thoughts, even as children. You know, the person that desperately wants validation, desperately needs love. That's the same energy. On the core level, it's the same as everyone else's experience. Now, it might be expressed differently, but when we go to the core of what's at the root of all of our experience, we're all the same. And so I really had to sit in, okay, the root of forgiveness is innocence. Can I find the innocence in the situation? And then can I act in a way that is the embodiment of who I really am? And I had to do this, and then I'll explain. This is one boss. I sat with this for like 2 or 3 hours, and then I had another boss. Everything, so on day 3, everything led up to this, and then I had an immense opening. Here's the question. Okay, why, Brandon, did you want her so bad? Why did you want sex so bad? And I remember going back to that version of me and feeling how desperate, literally desperate, I was for acceptance and love, especially from the men in my life at the time and women. I, at the time, dropped out of school and was pursuing network marketing, working for myself for the first time, and had this image in my head that if I make a lot of money and have a lot of sex, I'll be happy, fulfilled, loved, which by definition meant I'm not loved and I don't know how to find happiness and I don't know who I am. And so believing those thoughts at the time, it's like I saw myself as this desperate kid that didn't know where to source his love, where to feel fulfilled, how to feel happy. And that was so desperate to seek it in the world that, he would just do what he did. Even if only in my head it felt absolutely off, even if that was just my own experience, acting from desperation in any kind of sense. And once I was really able to see, man, I was desperate for love. It's not that I wanted to hurt or harm anyone. It's not that I wanted to control or dominate anyone. It's not that I'm a perpetrator. These are all the thoughts. It's that I was desperate for love and didn't know how to find it. And now I do. And now that just echoes in my current relationship, even having times in my current relationship where it's like my partner, she might not want to have sex and I do. And then I have all of this emotion come up. And I've had moments of literally just sitting there in the fetal position, crying, holding myself, going, you're safe. You're not being rejected. You're valuable, just as you are. And like moving through those layers and layers and layers. And I wouldn't be able to do that and then share this and give this to other people if I didn't have that experience. And so I was able to really see, okay, that's what a confused mind does. And that confusion has led to this clarity. And that clarity can be a gift to others and to the world. And once I could really find the innocence in me, the innocence in her, it just popped open. But I had to first join and fully feel, oh, Brandon, what does it feel like to be evil? Go there. Brandon, what does it feel like to have no one love you and everyone hate you and judge you and outcast you? Put yourself there. Go there. And all of those emotions were running up and, they were super intense. I'm like, yelling sometimes, crying other times, and really just letting them out. And then after I did the inquiry, it was just freedom and vast openness and innocence and understanding. And that was on day 3. And probably for the next 2 hours, like I explained in the beginning of this call, I experienced the kind of non-doer openness of life, just outside of time, just present. And then I came up against the second boss. I'm sitting there in my tent. Well, not a tent, under my tarp. And I'm laying there. and I'm just filled with so much joy. I have this like fun frequency come in. Like, man, I'm gonna have some fun with this right now. You know, being out in the desert, and I just start rapping to myself, freestyling. And if you knew me, you'd know when I was 18, probably from 18 to like 22, I would write raps. And a lot of times it was like for emotional processing, and I didn't even know it. And I'm sitting there and I'm freestyling, and I'm at like my level 10 ability to freestyle. I mean, like, I was shocking myself because, you know, I was just in such a flow state. It was like, da 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 da, like, it was amazing. And I'm laughing and I'm having a great time. And then I kind of lay there and I'm like, okay, I'm done now. I'm going to rest. Super sleep deprived, 1 to 2 hours of sleep a night. And my mind, I don't know if you guys can relate to this, but it just keeps rapping. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh, and I look up at the tarp and I'm like, maybe have a thought like, man, I need to pull this tarp a little tighter. And then my mind would just go, so I make sure it doesn't get any brighter, you know, underneath my feet, discreet, beneath. Like, I just start going off, but I'm not doing it. I'm literally watching my mind just think itself. And then I have this thought, okay, stop. It's too much. I want to sleep. And it's like sleep, creep, but deep, breep, believe. Like, it just keeps rhyming. And I have this thought of like, oh my God, am I going insane? Like, I am completely out of control when it comes to my own mind. And just rhyming and everything that I throw at it just rhymes. It just continues to rhyme. And now I'm starting to panic. I'm like, holy crap, I am not in control. I'm not in control of anything. I'm not in control. I'm not in control. And I'm fighting so hard to try to stop my mind. Because I think if I stop my mind, I'm going to have relief. If I stop my mind from thinking these thoughts, I'm going to be at peace. And actually, that thought right there, that belief, was the source of the stress, not the rapping, rhyming, thinking mind. The belief that I need my thoughts to stop or be a certain way in order to be at peace. And so first this lasted for like 30 or 40 minutes until I realized that. And then I was like, wait a second. And I started writing it down. I need my mind to stop in order to be free or at peace. Is it true? No. You know, my mind was going, you know, moments ago when I was non-doing, when I was just in flow, but I wasn't attaching. I wasn't trying to control. So this was the line that came through. Don't try to change your thoughts. Don't try to change your mind. Rather, question the thoughts that you believe are true that cause stress. And all I had to really do is to come back to myself is, whoa, wait a second. It's not my thinking. It's my thinking about my thinking. It's saying that I need to stop this. And I also went kind of in the direct non-dual path, said, well, who's the I that's trying to stop it? Is there an actual person called Brandon that could stop the thinking? No, he doesn't exist. That's my ego taking responsibility for my thoughts. So if I think that I'm doing my thoughts, I think it's my job to undo my thoughts. Well, that's called the world of suffering and being out of control. So I started to question this identity. I need to stop my thoughts. Wait, who's the I? Is that even possible? Is there even a person there doing the thinking? No, that's just the nature of the mind. And then I said, well, okay, well, what's actually the actual source of stress? You know, and it was the belief in the thought that I had to control my thoughts. In other words, that I'm a separate individual doing my thoughts and it's my job to undo my thoughts. Therefore, the suffering is up to me. And just like in many biblical texts, they'd say, don't put your faith in yourself, put it in me. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean don't believe in yourself. It just means don't believe that you are a self, that you are a body, mind, separate being, and that is responsible for your salvation, for your peace, for your transformation. So in investigating that, and asking the question, well, as this self, I think that I need to do X, Y, and Z. Well, if that self doesn't exist, then I don't need to do any of that. And so therefore, I don't believe anymore that I need to control my thinking in order to be at peace, because there's no I to do it anyway. And it's just impossible. And so the turnaround was I need to release control of my thinking to be at peace. And anytime a stressful thought would come up, well, you're going to be insane forever. I would go there. Let me put myself there. Okay, what does it mean to be insane? My definition was I can't control my thoughts. And it's like, well, is that true that that's insanity? Or is insanity resisting my thoughts? Why would it be insane to resist our thoughts? Because we can't control them anyway. You're not putting them there. You're not selecting from the thought menu, I'll take these thoughts today. They're just arising. So what's insane isn't having insane thoughts. It's fighting against our thoughts as if they are us, as if they are responsible for our joy or happiness or peace. And when you see clearly that they're not, and you don't fight against them, then they pass like clouds. And you get right back, or you never leave the blue sky behind them the entire time, which is the sense of being aware of your thinking. And that's called taking a step back. And that's really what I did, is once I questioned these thoughts and the identity and this person that I thought I was, and I'm doing these thoughts and I need to change them, and I started to step back and go, okay, here goes my rhyming mind. What is my awareness doing? Nothing. Still, open, vast, unagitated, unaffected. So let me give my attention to that versus the mind. Or it's more accurate to say, let me dissolve my attention towards my thoughts and trying to change them. And then what arises is a type of abiding in myself. And then what happens to my mind? What happened in that moment? Like as I actually sat back and abided in myself, the mind just fizzled out in the momentum over the next few minutes. The direction that it was going, it just fizzled out. And then the thoughts that would naturally come up were more about what was right in front of me. Oh, like, I love this rock. This is a cool rock. Oh, it's just right back here. So those two, it was like fear of being evil, fear of being abandoned, fear of not being loved, fear of being just completely unacceptable. And then the fear of insanity and being completely out of control. Those were the bosses. I probably had a good 3 to 4 hours of processing and journaling and moving through that on day 3. And that really led to the moment that named me Western Bloom. It was after I came out of that, I came out of my tarp setup. I went to the bathroom and I looked up and there's this bush with these yellow blooming flowers, and I'm staring at the flowers and I'm just crying and crying, and I couldn't stop it if I tried. And I realized I was crying because of beauty. I could see, before I saw the flowers, but I didn't see them. And it hit me, wow, so much beauty in the most desolate, harsh places, just like in ourselves. So much beauty is there if you fully surrender to it and you stop fighting it. The light shines through, the beauty of you shines through. And I'm just bursting out in gratitude and joy. Wow, everything is just absolutely beautiful. And again, reinforce the idea that beauty is not a thing out there. There's nothing that is more beautiful than another. Beauty is a state of being when you recognize yourself in all things. When I feel so close to this flower, meaning I'm not in past, I'm not in future, I'm not in resistance to anything. I'm just purely open, and now my attention's on this flower, and I can actually access the feeling of how close and connected and intimate I am with something like a flower. And that closeness and connection in nature is beauty. It's like love, the feeling of love, but expressed or reflected back in nature is beauty. And so, I wanted to go into a little more detail about the two bosses. Now, I'm going to share a little bit about the challenge, and then I will take some questions. But again, I share this because I wanted to give you context. Why did I change our show to Freedom Through Inquiry? Because that was my experience. My direct experience is to sit with myself in inquiry and to face those parts of myself directly. leads to freedom that is beautiful beyond words. And anyone can access it. I'm not special. No one's special. Anyone can access it. And it's direct. And that's what I'm excited about, is to really directly get to more peace and happiness. So I'm going to share the overview of the challenge, and then we'll do some questions. So challenge, 30 days. We are starting, oh man, I wrote the date down. Look in the description if you're on YouTube. Look in the description of this video. And for you guys watching live now, I'll send a message out. I believe we are starting in about 10 days. I don't remember the exact date, so I'll let you know, but it is about 10 days from now. And what the structure is, we're going to get into a Facebook group, and we're going to have 2 preparation calls. And on week 3 is going to be your fasting day. So week 1 and week 2 is the preparation phase. So it's about learning inquiry, practicing inquiry on yourself. And we're going to give you access to probably about 6 to 10 sessions that I've done with private clients on a whole range of subjects, because what I found the fastest way, the most effective way to learn inquiry is to practice it on yourself, have someone facilitate, you facilitate inquiry with you, which is what we'll be doing, but to also watch and witness other people's process of inquiry, which you can do by listening and studying sessions. So you're gonna have access to all of these sessions, which the beauty about that is when you witness someone holding on to a belief that you also hold on to, which is going to be all of them. You might not be holding on to it right now, but at some point in your life, you've held the same belief, the same feeling, the same thinking. When they release it, you release it. If you're present, if you're available, if you're open. So these 6, 7, 8, 9, however many we decide to send, transmissions or sessions could be 7, 8, 9, 10 deep breakthroughs that end generational patterns of suffering and avoidance or bad habits, whatever you want to call them, addiction even. So just that alone is incredibly powerful. We'll do some myth busting about inquiry. We'll teach what inquiry is, what are the questions to ask yourself, and we're actually going to give you a worksheet to fill out when doing inquiry. That's literally a fill in the blank that makes inquiry so easy. And then we'll have some videos that go along with that to really train you on it. So we're going to spend 2 weeks prepping in inquiry. And with that, you'll also get some prep for your work out in nature. What kind of spot to look for, what to bring with you, a basic safety protocol, this sort of thing. Then on the 3rd week, sometime during that week, you, and ideally an accountability buddy near you physically would be great. But if not, that's okay too. You would pick a day, ideally that you guys can go at the same time. If you can't, that's okay. But if you can, pick a day you can both go into nature. You're going to go into an area that's not densely populated, somewhere that's familiar to you. We would recommend, and we'll talk about this on the inside, going there before your day to set it up and find your camp and where you're going to stay before the actual day, because some people can get so distracted that they spend 6 hours trying to do that. So we identify the spot. You'll bring water, maybe some electrolytes. That's it. Fanny pack, maybe first aid kit. We'll give you all that. And a journal, your inquiry journal. Mine is right over there. So you're going to buy a journal just for this experience. If you have one, that's great, but I suggest getting a new one just for inquiry. And you're going to find a camp. You can be up against a tree. You can be near a body of water. It's totally up to you, but a place that's fairly isolated. And you're going to draw a big circle. We'll tell you how big on the inside. And you're going to not leave that circle unless you have to go to the bathroom. And you're going to meet every thought that comes up with inquiry. And I call this the karmic burner. In 16 hours of silence, stillness, non-doing, fasting, being with yourself or isolation, you will have more of your unconscious mind revealed to you than you would have in an ayahuasca ceremony, than you would have in a coaching session with me. I mean, this is like, hundreds and hundreds of thoughts. Don't get overwhelmed, but all of these thoughts that were passed down generation after generation. I mean, these are thoughts that are thousands of years old, that if you can allow yourself to become aware of and then take them through inquiry, I like to say, I was standing up stressed, or I would sit down stressed to do my work, and then I'd stand up free. So if you can meet those parts of yourself like that over and over and over and over until there's nothing there, just an open space of peace and love, and there's no one to prove it to, you're there for you, then in that one day, you can have more progress, more transformation, a deeper sense of embodied freedom than it might take most people 20 years to do. Because how often do we give ourselves that type of focused time? So that happens on the third week. We're all building up to that week. And then the fourth week, any place that you're stuck, any place that feels sticky, any place where there's confusion, you bring that back to the group. We have another call and we do a Q&A and we help you integrate this. If there's conversations you need to have, we teach you how to have conversations. Right after my desert trip, I went right back to my parents. And there were two memories that I had. One with my mom, where she just didn't believe me when my brother Josh was lying, and she believed him. And that was a moment where in that moment I said, now I have to prove myself to the feminine. And that carried with me for such a long time. And it taught me that I don't have to prove myself. So you don't go, I didn't come to my mom and say, you didn't believe me and it's your fault that I had to prove myself my whole life. No. I said, I'll just give you an example. Mom, I had this story come up that you believe Josh and not me, and I can't even know that that's true. And I believed it, and then I believed that I had to prove myself to you, or I had to prove that I'm right, because I felt wrong in that moment because of what I was thinking and believing as this 6-year-old kid. So it's full responsibility. And then I could tell them, and that has led me to discovering now that I don't need to prove myself and that it's okay for me to be wrong. And I'm so grateful for that lesson that you played a part in teaching me, and I love you. So we'll teach you ways of communicating. Anyway, that's the integration piece. So it's a 30-day experience. We're going to give you a mini version of what I got to experience in the desert. Because like I said, I was the only man in the desert that had this process of inquiry. And when we met up after and would talk about it, I would sit there thinking, man, this must have been so incredibly difficult for some of these men that didn't have inquiry, because they just would have to sit in the thought and the feeling and just not know what to do with it, maybe avoid or distract. I felt so grateful for inquiry. And then I came back, spoke to my parents. We had these beautiful conversations, crying and hugging, and just a very sweet. Then I went back to my community here and I had a tea ceremony with about eight individuals that are very close to me. And each of them showed up in my vision in different ways, all reflecting back to me where I was showing up as inauthentic in our relationship. So I would share a moment that I was inauthentic with each of them, or when I had a motivation by personal gain, or just something that wasn't truly me and heart-centered. And I would share it, I would acknowledge it, and I would apologize, and I would be open and say, I'm open to your feedback on how I could be a better friend. And I would do that around the table. So there were some tears for me, tears for them. It was just this beautiful opening, and they got to receive me as Western Bloom. That is a man that is transparent, or that fathers himself with and others with transparency, humility, and compassion. I got to come back and be transparent, humble enough to own what came up for me, and compassionate to know that it was not anyone's fault. That was just the nature of conditioning playing itself out. And I'm here to acknowledge it, to respond to it, and let it go. And I love you for being my teacher in that. And it just brought us together in just such a beautiful way. So I want to give you a mini experience of that, absolutely free. Again, if you're watching this on YouTube, check the link below to get more information. For you guys on Conscious Vitality, look out for an email. And yeah, I think that's all I have so far. So thank you guys for receiving my story. I have about 10 more minutes here. If you guys have any questions or comments, I'd love to respond. All right, y'all. That is all I got for now. Thank you guys so much for being here and for listening and for engaging. Look out for all of the information on the free challenge, and I will see you all next week.